Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe because nobody really saw her anymore, not the way they once did. Sienna Murphy had learned to live with that. Once she'd been the kind of woman people noticed when she entered a room, the one whose quiet authority drew attention even when she said nothing. Now, at forward operating base Sentinel, she was the one who refilled the coffee urns before dawn, who wiped down tables after meals, who stayed behind the counter wearing a white apron that still carried faint stains from bacon grease. To most of the soldiers here, she was just Murphy, the cook. And maybe that was fine. Maybe that was the point. The dining facility at Fob Sentinel was supposed to be the safest place in the entire base, a square of concrete and steel where men and women could eat, decompress, and forget for 15 minutes that the world outside was trying to kill them. Sienna made sure of that. Every morning, 400 sharp, the kitchen lights flicked on. The soft hum of industrial fans filled the air, followed by the metallic clatter of trays, the hiss of the griddle, and the first comforting scent of coffee. It was ritual, and rituals kept people sane. But what no one ever saw, what no one thought to notice, was the M4 carbine hanging 3 feet from her prep station, loaded, safety on, but always within reach. Regulations said weapons weren't allowed inside the dining facility. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks, had made an exception for her, not because of who she was now, but because of who she had been. 8 years, 8 years of classified operations, 8 years of endless deployments, night jumps, sandstorms, and silence. 8 years of being one of the few women in a world where mistakes were measured in lives, not seconds. And then one mission, one jump, one moment, her knee gave out. High-altitude insertion gone wrong. Ligaments torn, surgery, recovery, and a new kind of silence, the one that comes when the war moves on without you. Most people would have taken the discharge. Sienna didn't. She spent too long fighting to belong to that world. So when they told her she couldn't operate anymore, she told them she'd find another way to serve. Now she was here, a cook on a dusty outpost near the Afghan border. She liked to think she'd chosen it, but some nights, when the generators hummed and the mountains looked like broken shadows under the moonlight, she wondered if it was just another form of exile. Still, she worked with the same discipline she once brought to missions. Every spatula had its place. Every knife was cleaned and sharpened after use. Mise en place, everything in its place. The kitchen version of tactical readiness. Her small team respected her, even if they didn't fully understand her. 2 privates, young, restless, always cracking jokes, and a logistics specialist who tried to act tougher than he felt. They learned early not to slack off around her. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her quiet tone carried more weight than any shouted order. "You really think we need to stack the trays by height?" one of them had joked once. Sienna hadn't even looked up from her prep board. "You'll thank me when something goes wrong." They didn't get it, not yet. The war had a way of reminding people why order mattered. That morning began like any other. The base was stirring to life under a pale gray dawn. Patrols were gearing up. Radios crackled. The smell of diesel mixed with the scent of frying eggs. Somewhere outside, someone laughed, that brief, easy kind of laugh soldiers share before the day turns serious again. Inside the kitchen, Sienna flipped pancakes with steady rhythm. She moved like someone performing a drill, fluid, efficient, no wasted motion. Every sound mattered to her. The sizzle of batter on the griddle, the hiss of steam from the coffee urn, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. Noise was data, and data kept you alive. Her mind drifted back to a conversation from weeks earlier, a question from a young private who'd been bold enough to ask. "You really used to be a SEAL?" Sienna had smiled faintly. "Still am." He'd laughed, not realizing she meant it. That morning at 05:30, the first alarm shattered the air. A rising wail, sharp, mechanical, unmistakable. The kind of sound that drills into your bones before your brain even registers it. The attack siren. Sienna didn't freeze. She didn't even flinch. She reached out, turned off the burner, and listened. Mortar fire. No, the rhythm wasn't right. Too sharp, too close. Automatic gunfire. Not from the perimeter, from inside the compound. She looked up. Her team stared back at her, eyes wide, half expecting orders, half hoping she'd tell them it was nothing. "Everyone," she said quietly, "into the office." Her tone wasn't loud, but it had that certain calm that makes people move faster than shouting ever could. They followed her through the side door into a small office space lined with metal cabinets. Sienna unlocked one with a key she'd never used in front of them before. Inside, 3 M4s, body armor, and first aid kits. The room went silent. "Vest on, weapon up, stay low. If anyone comes through that door who's not U.S. military, you engage. Understand?" The youngest private hesitated. "Ma'am, what about you?" Sienna reached for her rifle, slid off her apron, and checked the chamber with the muscle memory of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "I'm going to make sure nobody gets through that door." She stepped back into the kitchen. Her boots were silent against the concrete. Through the windows she could see movement, soldiers running, muzzle flashes sparking in the half-light. Then, the heavy, unmistakable chatter of PKM machine guns. Not a mortar attack, not harassment fire. This was a breach, inside the wire. Sienna's pulse didn't spike. Her breathing stayed steady. This was familiar territory, chaos that had rules, fear that had purpose. She took position behind a concrete pillar, rifle up, sight line on the side entrance. Then a sound, boots on gravel, voices shouting in a language she knew too well. The door slammed open. 2 men burst in, AKs raised. Her world shrank to angles and timing. She squeezed twice, 2 shots, 2 impacts. Both targets down before they even registered she'd fired. 1.2 seconds. Her radio hissed to life. "Dining facility is under attack," she transmitted, voice steady. The reply crackled through. "Copy, QRF responding, hold your position." She did. More footsteps, louder, closer, 3 more fighters. They fired wildly, rounds hammering against metal tables, shattering trays, sparking off concrete. Sienna dropped to one knee, leaned out just enough, and fired short, controlled bursts. 1 down. Another tried to hide behind a prep table, bad cover. 4 rounds. Silence. The last one turned to run. She didn't let him. 5 bodies. 5 men who'd thought this was a soft target. But the kitchen smelled of gunpowder now, not bacon. She checked her ammo, 1 mag nearly spent, 2 full left. 60 rounds. Her training kicked in, a voice in her head from an instructor years ago: always move, always change angles, stay unpredictable. She shifted position toward the serving line. The next wave came through the main entrance. 4 of them, moving tactically this time, better trained. She waited. Let them enter. Let them think it was clear. Then she struck from the flank, her rounds precise and deliberate. By the time the last man realized what was happening, his team was gone. 4 more down. The smell of cordite mixed with grease. The air shimmered with heat and dust. Somewhere outside, the battle was raging, machine guns, shouting, explosions echoing across the base. But in here, it was just her, one woman in a kitchen battlefield. Her radio cracked again. "Sienna, this is TOC. We've got eyes on you through security cams. 8 to 10 hostiles still converging on your position. Can you hold?" She looked at her rifle, at the brass casings littering the floor. "I can hold." "Copy. QRF's pinned down at the command center. You're on your own for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, against a squad of trained fighters. Sienna exhaled slowly, plenty of time. She adjusted her stance, checked her sightlines, listened. Through the ringing silence, she caught a faint clatter, the sound of a magazine being slammed into a weapon. Someone outside the emergency exit. 2, maybe 3. They breached seconds later, the door swinging open, sunlight spilling in behind them. Sienna was already moving, already firing. 2 bursts, 2 bodies down. The third froze, she didn't. Then quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm but before the next one hits. She felt her knee throbbing now, that familiar ache that reminded her of what she'd lost, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. The radio crackled once more, voices friendly this time, closer. She moved toward the main entrance, rifle raised. Dust drifted through the light like smoke. Then came the call. Friendly approaching from your 6, hold your fire. Sienna lowered her weapon. DFAC secure, 16 hostiles down. The QRF team swept in, rifles up, moving fast. Their sergeant stopped mid-step when he saw her, kitchen white streaked with soot, eyes calm, weapon steady. Jesus Christ, Murphy, he said, scanning the room full of bodies. You did all this. Sienna saved her weapon, setting it on the counter. They tried to breach the dining facility. She gave a faint shrug. I discouraged them. The sergeant laughed, half in disbelief, half in awe. You're still a damn SEAL. Sienna's gaze softened for a moment. Still am, she said quietly. Just make better coffee now. Outside, the sounds of battle faded. The sun rose higher, spilling light across a base that had survived the impossible. And in the kitchen, amid shattered trays, empty casings, and the faint smell of pancakes gone cold, Sienna Murphy picked up her apron again. Because the soldiers would still need breakfast. And hope wasn't a strategy. She stood in the middle of the wreckage, the smell of gunpowder still hanging thick in the air, a strange mix of steel, sweat, and breakfast grease. Outside, the base was still echoing with distant shouts and the mechanical roar of engines, but inside the dining facility, time felt suspended. Every sound, footsteps, clattering shell casings, the hiss of a leaking steam line, seemed amplified against the ringing silence that followed violence. Sienna Murphy wiped her hands on her apron and noticed the faint smear of soot across her forearm. Her knee ached from crouching, her pulse had finally slowed, but her mind remained razor-sharp. Combat never really left you, it just waited like an old ghost in your bones, ready to wake when needed. The quick reaction team fanned out through the facility, clearing corners, confirming what was already obvious. There were bodies everywhere, some crumpled near the serving line, others sprawled by the doors, rifles still clutched in lifeless hands. The youngest soldier in the team, a private barely 20, stared at the floor with wide eyes, trying to process what he was seeing. 16 men dead in a room that smelled like breakfast. Murphy, the team leader, called, his voice half disbelieving. You're sure that's all of them? She glanced toward the side entrance where sunlight cut through the dust. 17, she corrected softly. One tried to crawl out the back, he didn't make it. The sergeant gave a low whistle, shaking his head. You just turned a dining hall into a kill box. Sienna didn't answer. She holstered her weapon and looked toward the small office where her kitchen team was still hiding. Clear, she called. You can come out. 3 nervous faces appeared. The privates moved like they were stepping into another world. Their hands shook as they lowered their rifles, eyes darting from body to body. They'd never seen real combat up close, never smelled it, never felt the heaviness that filled a room afterward. The specialist swallowed hard. Ma'am, are we safe now? For now, Sienna said quietly. QRF's got the rest contained. You did good staying put. He nodded, but his face was pale. One of the privates looked like he might throw up. Sienna reached out, steadied his shoulder. Look at me, she said gently. Breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Don't stare at them, look at me. He obeyed. The trembling slowed a little. That's it, you're fine. Fear's normal. You just don't let it run the show. Her tone was calm, almost maternal. She'd talked men through shock before, on dusty roads and burning rooftops halfway around the world. The words were instinct now. Outside, vehicles rumbled past, armored trucks moving toward the perimeter. The base was alive again, recovering, recalibrating. Sienna moved through the kitchen, inspecting the damage with the same precision she used to check gear after a mission. Equipment could be repaired. People, that was harder. Williams, the QRF leader, watched her as he spoke into his radio. Command DFAC secure, 17 KIA, no friendly casualties. He paused, eyes flicking toward Sienna. Yeah, you heard me right, 17. One cook, copy. He ended the transmission and shook his head again. Hell of a morning, Murphy. Breakfast shift runs till 800, she said. Still got time. You're serious? She gave a faint smile. Soldiers will be hungry, and adrenaline burns calories. For a second he just stared at her, then laughed quietly, the sound a mix of awe and exhaustion. You're something else. When they left to assist the medics, she finally let the silence settle. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the faint tremor that always came later, the body's delayed reaction to chaos. She let herself feel it, then pushed it away. There was still work to do. She walked to the prep table where her apron had landed during the fight. It was torn, dust-stained, and spattered with dark spots she didn't want to think about. She rinsed it under the faucet, watching the water run pink before it cleared. Then she turned back to the stove, reigniting the burners. By the time the forensics team arrived an hour later, the smell of pancakes had returned to the air. Sergeant Murphy, the base commander said from the doorway. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hendricks was tall, composed, and visibly trying not to look stunned by the sight before her. Sienna in kitchen whites, calmly stirring batter while soldiers photographed bullet holes in the walls. Ma'am, Sienna greeted, setting down the whisk. I need an after-action report as soon as possible, Hendricks said, stepping around a shattered tray. But are you cooking? Yes, ma'am. Soldiers still need to eat. We've got about 200 hungry people out there who just survived an attack. The colonel exhaled, half incredulous, half admiring. You just fought off 17 armed militants and your first thought is breakfast. Attack over, Sienna said simply. Mission done, now they need food. For a long moment Hendricks said nothing. Then quietly, you're a SEAL through and through. Sienna gave a small, polite nod. Just doing my job, ma'am. By 800, the dining line was open again. Word had already spread across the base. Soldiers came through in small groups, weapons slung, faces still smudged from the firefight. Some offered nervous smiles. Others couldn't stop glancing around the bullet-scarred walls. Every one of them paused when they saw her behind the counter. Morning, Sergeant Murphy, one corporal said softly. Heard what you did. Sienna just nodded. Pancakes or eggs? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Both. Some thanked her for breakfast. Some thanked her for keeping them alive. Most said nothing at all. They just looked at her differently now, respectfully, maybe even reverently. She didn't like that. She wasn't interested in being a legend. Legends got told. She preferred to stay useful. When the last soldier moved through the line, she sat down on a crate in the storage room and finally let herself breathe. The noise outside had quieted, but inside her head the echoes still played, the rhythm of gunfire, the ricochet of bullets, the moment of silence between shots. She rubbed her knee absently, feeling the dull ache pulse beneath the scar. The doctors had said she'd never be 100% again. They were right, but she was still enough to hold the line. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Hendricks again, this time with a folder in her hand. You got a minute, Sergeant? Always, ma'am. The colonel set the folder on the table. We pulled the security footage from the cameras, watched the whole engagement. I've seen combat for 20 years and I've never seen anything like that. Professional, surgical, efficient. Sienna shrugged lightly. I had good angles, concrete cover. They came through narrow doorways. I just applied basic tactics. Basic tactics don't pull off 17 kills in 10 minutes. She didn't answer. Compliments made her uncomfortable. They always had. Praise was for medals. She learned long ago that real warriors didn't chase those, they chased results. Hendricks opened the folder, revealing a draft citation form. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star." Sienna blinked, surprised. "That's not necessary, ma'am." "It is. You saved this base, and I'm also reconsidering your assignment." "With respect, ma'am," Sienna interrupted gently, "I requested this duty. I'm good here." "You're too valuable to be flipping pancakes." "I'm not flipping them, ma'am," she said, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "I'm feeding soldiers who'll go outside that wire again tomorrow. That matters." Hendrik studied her for a long moment. "You really want to stay in the kitchen?" "I want to stay useful. My knee won't let me operate with a team anymore, but I can still shoot, still lead, still serve. Here, I do all three." Silence. Then Hendricks nodded slowly. "All right, you stay. But from now on, you're not just the cook. You're DFAC manager and QRF reserve sniper. When we're attacked, you fight first, cook second." "Deal," Sienna said softly. The ceremony came 2 weeks later. The entire base gathered in the courtyard, dust swirling around their boots. Hendricks read the citation aloud, her voice steady over the wind. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States." The words blurred together in Sienna's mind. She didn't need them. The medal was heavy in her hand, gleaming silver against the desert sun. When it was over, she stepped down from the podium and slipped quietly back toward the dining facility. She wasn't comfortable in crowds. Never had been. But as she reached the door, a young private intercepted her, a kid with freckles and eyes too earnest for war. "Sergeant Murphy," he said quickly, "I just wanted to thank you. I was in the bunker during the attack. I was terrified, but knowing you were here, it helped. I felt safe." She looked at him for a long second, then smiled faintly. "That's all that matters, Private. Fear's fine, panic kills. Remember that." "Yes, ma'am." He saluted awkwardly and walked off. She watched him go, feeling something stir quietly inside her, a small, unexpected flicker of pride. Not for the medal, not for the kills, but because somewhere in that chaos, someone had felt safe because she was there. That meant something. Later, back in the kitchen, she hung the medal on a small hook beside her rifle. It caught the light just enough to glint when the sun came through the window. A reminder, not of glory, but of purpose. That night the base was quiet again. She sat outside the DFAC with a cup of coffee, staring at the mountains fading into shadow. Somewhere out there were the remnants of the same fighters who'd attacked them. They'd regroup. They always did. And if they came again, she'd be ready. Same apron, same rifle, same silence before the storm. She thought about the years before, about the missions she couldn't talk about, the teammates she'd lost, the knee that still ached when it rained. Once, she'd believed her life was over when she left the teams. Now she understood something different. The uniform didn't make the warrior. The purpose did. And purpose could take any form, even breakfast at 400. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of coffee and diesel. Somewhere a generator hummed. Life went on. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And on that quiet night, under the indifferent stars, Sienna Murphy decided that being a cook didn't make her less of a warrior. It just gave her a new battlefield. Why couldn't she sleep anymore? It wasn't the noise, not really. The base was never silent. Generators hummed, radios crackled, boots scuffed across gravel at all hours. Life at Fob Sentinel was constant motion, even in the dark. But Sienna's mind had grown too loud for rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, muzzle bursts lighting the dining facility, the sharp metallic scent of blood mixing with coffee, the ringing echo of each shot she'd fired. 17 men. She counted them, not to boast, but because that number had weight. Each face was another reminder that even when you did everything right, even when you survived, you left something behind. Her body healed quickly. The base didn't stop for heroes, it barely paused. Within days, the mess hall was repaired, the walls patched and repainted, the bullet holes sealed under fresh concrete. Soldiers came in for breakfast like before. They laughed louder now, joked that the dining facility was the safest place on base. Sienna smiled at their jokes, poured coffee, asked how the patrols went. But she felt something changing the way people looked at her. Once they'd seen her as background. Now when she entered a room, conversations paused, heads turned, whispers followed, "That's her. That's the cook who killed 17." She'd never wanted that kind of attention. Quiet was her armor. At first it was just respect. Then came the rumors, stories growing with every retelling. By the end of the week, she'd apparently fought off 50 men single-handedly, taken a bullet to the shoulder, and kept cooking afterward. She didn't correct them. Let the myth live if it kept morale high. But she knew the truth. Courage wasn't about the shots you fired, it was about the ones you didn't. Still, when the lights dimmed and the base went still, the ghosts visited. She'd sit on the small cot in her quarters, staring at the rifle propped against the wall. The same weapon that had saved her and others. The same one that had ended lives. In her dreams, she was back on the mountain, not in the kitchen. Wind roaring in her ears, snow cutting into her face, the radio full of static. Her SEAL team had been pinned down behind a rocky ridge, outnumbered, low on ammo. She remembered the calm in her voice as she called targets for air support. Remembered her team leader's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. He died 30 minutes later. She woke up with her heart pounding and the same question looping in her head: how many more? By morning, she was back in the kitchen. Routine saved her. It always had. Crack eggs, heat grill, brew coffee, keep moving, don't think. Her assistants had changed since the attack. The privates who'd hidden in the office were different now, quieter, more respectful, maybe even a little scared of her. They followed orders faster, cleaned more carefully, watched her like she was something between a legend and a warning. The new rotation brought fresh faces too, young soldiers curious about the stories they'd heard. One morning, a lieutenant approached the serving line, studying her with faint disbelief. "You're the one, right? The SEAL cook." She kept her eyes on the tray. "Coffee's hot, grab a mug." He hesitated. "It's just, I didn't think it was real." She looked up, expression neutral. "Most things worth believing are." He smiled awkwardly and moved on. But the stares continued, some full of admiration, others of curiosity, a few of discomfort, the kind soldiers have when they realize the quiet person beside them could kill with absolute precision if needed. That afternoon, she was called to the operations center. The base commander, Colonel Hendricks, waited behind her desk with the same calm authority she'd shown since day one. "Sit down, Sergeant." Sienna took the chair. The walls around them hummed with maps, comm screens, and distant chatter from other stations. "I've been reviewing your after-action reports," Hendricks said. "You're still managing DFAC duties flawlessly, but your alertness ratings, your night watch attendance, your training sessions, they're higher than anyone's on base. You're averaging 4 hours of sleep a night." Sienna folded her hands. "Just staying sharp, ma'am." Hendricks gave a thin smile. "That's one way to put it. Another way is you don't know how to stop being a soldier even when the fight over." Sienna didn't respond. The colonel leaned back. "You ever talk about what happened?" "With who?" "Anyone?" "No, ma'am." Hendricks studied her for a long moment. "There's a counselor rotation coming through next week. Combat stress team. Maybe talk to them. What you did was extraordinary, but that kind of intensity, it leaves a mark." "I'm fine, ma'am." "You're not," Hendricks said gently. "You're functional, that's different." Sienna looked away. Through the narrow window she could see the motor pool, soldiers loading trucks, dust rising like smoke. Life moved on. It always did. "Permission to return to duty?" she asked quietly. The colonel sighed. "Granted, but Murphy, take care of yourself. The base needs you alive, not perfect." Back in the kitchen, she scrubbed the grill harder than necessary, trying to burn off the conversation. Fine. What did that even mean anymore? The truth was, she didn't know how to exist without a mission. Purpose had been her compass for so long that standing still felt wrong. That night the rain came, rare in that region but relentless. It drummed against the roof of the DFAC, drowning out the usual hum of the generators. She stayed late, cleaning after dinner service. The others had gone to their quarters hours ago. The base lights flickered in the storm, shadows moving across the walls. She caught herself listening the way she always did. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps, every clang of metal like a rifle bolt. Her body never stopped scanning for danger. She was always halfway between peace and readiness, caught in a loop she couldn't escape. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the rain turn the dirt into dark rivers. The smell of wet earth mixed with diesel. Somewhere, thunder rolled like distant artillery. Her thoughts drifted to home, Louisiana. The heat, the cicadas, her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of gumbo on the stove. That was where she'd learned patience, where she'd learned that service didn't always mean carrying a weapon. Sometimes it meant feeding people who needed strength to keep going. She smiled faintly at the memory, but the ache behind it was real. She hadn't been home in years. Every deployment had blurred into the next until the concept of home became abstract, something she could imagine but never touch. The door creaked behind her. "You're still up," a voice said softly. It was Williams, the QRF sergeant. He leaned against the doorframe, rain dripping from his poncho. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Join the club," he said, stepping inside. "Half the base is wired after that attack. You set a hell of an example, Murphy. Everyone's still talking about it." "I noticed." He grinned faintly. "You don't like it, do you?" She shook her head. "The story's gotten bigger than what happened. That's dangerous." "Maybe, but it's also good for morale. People believe this place is unbreakable now. They believe you are." "I'm not unbreakable, Sergeant." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "None of us are. We just try not to show the cracks." They sat in silence for a while, the storm filling the space between them. Finally, he said quietly, "You ever think about rejoining the teams? I mean, in some capacity, instructor, maybe." She exhaled, "Thought about it, but I think I'm where I'm supposed to be. In a kitchen. In a place that still needs me." He smiled, stood, and adjusted his gear. "You ever get tired of being the toughest person on this base, let me know. We'll trade shifts." She laughed quietly, "Deal." When he left, she stayed by the window, watching the storm ease into drizzle. The air felt cleaner, fresher. Somewhere deep inside, something loosened. She realized she wasn't afraid of the memories, just of losing purpose again. The fight, the structure, the routine, they'd always defined her. But maybe, just maybe, she could start redefining what strength looked like. Not the loud kind, the silent, steady kind. The next morning, she added something new to the breakfast menu, Cajun-style omelets, her grandmother's recipe. Soldiers lined up, surprised, joking about fancy food on deployment. She smiled, deflecting their jokes with quiet grace. But when she saw them eating, laughing, alive, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the injury. Pride, not the kind that came from medals or confirmed kills. The kind that came from service that built, not destroyed. After the meal, she sat outside, watching the mountains glow gold under the rising sun. Somewhere in that vast silence, she whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what healing looks like." For the first time in months, she believed it. The quiet never lasted long out here. Sienna learned that again 3 weeks later, when the silence she'd started to trust broke apart like glass. It began with the sound of rotors, low, steady, deliberate. A Black Hawk descending through the dust, bringing new personnel, new supplies, and, as always, new rumors. The soldiers called these arrivals the shuffle. People in, people out. Faces changed, but the war stayed the same. That morning, she was already in the kitchen by 4, same routine, heat, prep, focus. The place smelled like coffee and pepper, the early warmth of a day that hadn't yet gone wrong. Her knee still ached, but it had become an old companion now, a dull ache that reminded her she was alive. Outside, the desert was still dark. The stars were fading, and the first hint of dawn bled into the horizon. She liked those minutes before sunrise, when the world was quiet enough to hear herself think. The door swung open. William stepped in, brushing sand off his jacket. "Morning, Murphy. You see the bird come in?" "Yeah," she said. "Resupply." "Mostly, plus a few new faces." He paused, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You might want to know, one of them's from your old command, Naval Special Warfare." Sienna froze, spatula hovering above the grill. "You sure?" He nodded. "Guy said he knew you, Commander Elias Ward." The name hit her like a memory she didn't want. Ward had been her co during her last deployment, the one that went sideways, the one that left her knee shattered and her team half gone. "What's he doing here?" she asked quietly. "Advisory visit. Intel coordination or something. Looks like he's hopping between bases." Sienna turned back to the griddle, flipping a pancake that didn't need flipping. "Noted." William studied her for a moment, then decided not to press. "Anyway, breakfast smells better than anything we've had all month. Keep doing what you do." He left and the room went still again. Ward, she hadn't seen him since the medevac flight that pulled her out of the mountains. He'd visited once during her recovery, sat beside her hospital bed and told her she'd done everything right, that the op was compromised before it even began. But the look in his eyes had said otherwise. The mission had failed, and failure always needed a place to land. By 700, the dining facility was full. Soldiers filed through the line, the usual rhythm of trays, laughter, and tired eyes. She kept her movements steady, mechanical, as if repetition could erase the name echoing in her mind. Then he walked in. Elias Ward hadn't changed much. A few more lines around his eyes, a few more ribbons on his chest, but the same posture, shoulders back, jaw firm, the kind of confidence that filled a room without trying. He scanned the hall once and spotted her behind the counter. Their eyes met. "Sergeant Murphy," he said, approaching with a faint smile. "Heard you turned breakfast into a war story." She wiped her hands on a towel. "Just another day at work, sir." 17 hostiles isn't just another day. Hell, they're still talking about you at Coronado. You made quite the impression. She didn't respond. Praise from him didn't feel like praise, it felt like a test. "You mind if I sit?" he asked. Soldiers usually don't ask the cook for permission. He smiled. "I'm not most soldiers." She gestured toward a corner table. "Suit yourself." He sat, watching her move around the kitchen with the same precision she'd once shown clearing rooms. When she finally joined him, coffee in hand, he leaned forward. "You know, I tried to get you reinstated 2 years ago," he said. "Told the board we needed operators like you. They needed people who could run 10 miles without their knee locking up. They needed people who don't quit." "I didn't quit, sir. I adapted." He studied her quietly. "You really okay here, flipping eggs in the middle of nowhere?" She met his gaze. "Better than doing nothing." For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he just nodded. "Fair enough. Listen, I'm here for 48 hours. We've got intel about a possible cell regrouping west of the valley. If anything happens, I want to know this place is ready." "It is," she said simply. "Good." He stood, finishing his coffee. "Still proud of you, Murphy, always was." He left before she could respond. But something inside her stirred, a small, sharp unease she couldn't quite name. That night she stayed later than usual, cleaning up after dinner. Rain threatened again, heavy clouds rolling in over the mountains. She was wiping down the counter when the first distant explosion shuddered through the air. Not thunder, not this time. Seconds later, the alarm wailed. "Incoming." The kitchen lights flickered. The ground trembled under another blast, closer this time. She grabbed her radio. "TOC, this is DFAC. Confirm attack." Static, then a voice. "Mortar barrage, origin point unknown. Possible follow-up assault. All personnel to defensive positions." Her heart tightened. Not again. She grabbed her rifle from the hook, chambered around, and scanned the hall. Soldiers were already rushing toward bunkers, but Ward appeared in the doorway, helmet half buckled, shouting over the noise. "Murphy, you with me?" "Where?" "Command center. We've got eyes on possible infiltrators near the west gate." Without hesitation, she slung her weapon and followed. The night outside was chaos, sirens, shouts, the sky flashing with tracer fire. Dust burned her lungs as they ran, her knee protesting every step but refusing to give out. They reached the command bunker, ducking inside just as another mortar round hit somewhere behind them. Inside, radios screamed with overlapping voices. Maps glowed red with markers. "Enemy movement west sector confirmed," a young officer shouted. "Small unit, maybe 10 to 12, testing the wire." Ward leaned over the table. "They're probing, looking for weak spots. If they breach again, they'll target high-value positions. Same pattern as last time." His eyes flicked to Sienna. "You know what that means?" She nodded grimly. The dining facility, the command center, soft targets that turned hard fast. Ward keyed the mic. "All units, defensive posture. Murphy, you take QRF reserve. Lock down the DFAC." "Copy." She sprinted back through the compound, boots pounding against wet gravel. The air stank of smoke and ozone. Somewhere in the distance, machine guns hammered in short bursts. She reached the DFAC, heart pounding. Her team was already inside, pale but ready. "Lock the doors, lights low," she ordered. "No one in or out." The sounds of gunfire came closer. A single shot cracked from the west wall, then another. Through the narrow window she caught a glimpse, 3 silhouettes moving fast between shadows. They weren't Americans. Her hands tightened on the rifle, again. But this time it wasn't chaos. This time it was control. "Positions," she whispered. The first figure reached the door, weapon raised. She fired once. The glass shattered outward and the silhouette dropped. 2 more ducked for cover, returning fire blindly. Her rounds punched through the dark, each shot deliberate. In less than a minute, it was over. She exhaled, scanning the area. The base alarm shifted tones, 3 short bursts, all clear. The mortars had stopped, the infiltrators neutralized. Her radio crackled, Ward's voice, "Status. DFAC secure, 3 KIA outside perimeter." "Good work, Murphy, you all right?" "I'm fine." But when the line went quiet, she wasn't sure if that was true. She leaned against the wall, adrenaline ebbing, the tremor starting in her hands again. Her team stared at her, half in fear, half in awe. The younger private spoke first. "How do you stay so calm?" She looked at him, then down at the rifle still warm in her grip. "You don't," she said quietly. "You just act faster than the fear." By dawn, the base was secure again. The dead were counted, the debris cleared. Another attack repelled, another night survived. Ward found her sitting on a crate outside, staring at the horizon. The morning light painted everything gold, almost peaceful. "You did good," he said softly. She didn't look up. "You said that before." "Because it's true." She turned to him. "Then why does it feel like it never ends?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because for people like us, it doesn't. We just find new battlegrounds." She studied his face, the weariness behind his eyes. For the first time, she saw the cracks, the weight he carried, the ghosts of his own. "Sir," she said after a while, "do you ever regret staying in?" He smiled faintly. "Every day and never once." She nodded. "Yeah, that sounds about right." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of smoke. Around them, soldiers moved with the rhythm of survival, fixing, cleaning, rebuilding. It was always the same cycle: break, mend, repeat. Before he left later that day, Ward stopped by the kitchen one last time. "You ever change your mind about coming back," he said, "there'll always be a place for you on my team." She met his eyes. "Thank you, sir, but I think I've already got one." He smiled, gave a small nod, and walked out. When the door closed, she stood alone again in her kitchen. The air smelled of coffee and cordite, of two worlds colliding in the same space. She glanced at the rifle hanging by the prep station, then at the silver star glinting faintly beside it. Different weapons, same purpose. She lit the griddle, cracked the first egg, and listened to the soft hiss as it met the heat. Outside, the desert stretched endless and indifferent. Inside, she kept serving one meal, one day, one act of quiet resilience at a time. Because some people fought wars with bullets, and some with steadiness. And sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was to keep cooking. Why did silence feel louder after survival? For days after the second attack, the base seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers still went about their routines, patrols, reports, chow, maintenance. But the laughter that once filled the DFAC felt quieter now, as if everyone sensed that what had happened wasn't just another skirmish. It was something closer, sharper, personal. Sienna felt it too. The stillness after violence always came with a cost, not in blood, but in the way people looked at each other differently. The easy smiles were gone. The pauses lingered longer. The story of the SEAL cook had spread again, further than before. Command had even sent word of commendation through official channels. She ignored it. What she remembered most from that night wasn't the firefight, or the kills, or even Ward's steady voice over the radio. It was the silence that followed, the weight that pressed against her chest when she realized she hadn't hesitated once. She acted on instinct, like the muscle memory of a ghost. No doubt, no mercy, just training. And that scared her more than the attack itself. Her hands were steady again, but her mind was. Sometimes, in the middle of prepping breakfast, she'd lose herself, eyes fixed on the knife she was holding, remembering how smooth her movements had been when the rifle was in her hands instead. The precision felt the same. The discipline, the breathing, the calm. Cooking and killing both demanded control, and she hated that she could no longer tell the difference in her body's rhythm. One night she found herself sitting outside the DFAC, her back against the wall, rifle across her knees, staring into the dark beyond the wire. The desert was silent, except for the occasional crackle of the perimeter lights. The mountains stood like black shapes against the sky. Out there, the enemy watched. They always did. Williams approached quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're getting predictable, Murphy," he said, handing her one. She accepted it with a faint smile. "Routine keeps me sane." "You've been out here every night since the attack. Thought maybe you were waiting for something." She took a sip. The coffee was bitter but grounding. "Maybe I am." "For what?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "For the noise to stop in my head." He nodded, understanding immediately. "It never does. You just learn to turn the volume down." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the bass. Then he said quietly, "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't been injured?" She exhaled slowly. "Probably deployed with a team somewhere, same dust, same sky, same war, different uniform." "You ever wish you stayed out there?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "No, not anymore. There's no version of that life that doesn't end in someone's grave. At least here I can build something, feed people who fight, keep them alive a little longer. It's enough." He smiled faintly. "You really believe that?" "I'm learning to." The conversation faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the night. Somewhere beyond the wire, a dog barked, distant, lonely. "Williams," she said after a long pause, "do you ever feel guilty for surviving?" He didn't answer right away. "Every damn day." Sienna nodded. "Yeah, me too." The next morning she woke before dawn and stared at the mirror above her sink. Her reflection looked the same, hair tied tight, uniform crisp, eyes alert, but something underneath had shifted. The face that stared back wasn't the operator she used to be or the cook she pretended to be. It was something in between. She pinned her hair back tighter and went to work. That day, the base commander visited again. Hendricks moved through the kitchen like someone who didn't belong but was trying to understand. "Morning, Sergeant," she said, stopping by the counter. "Ma'am," Sienna replied. "I've got word from command," Hendricks said. "They're rotating another support unit in next month. We'll have twice the personnel in the DFAC. I want you to train the new staff." "Yes, ma'am." The colonel hesitated, studying her. "You're still doing night patrols, aren't you?" "Voluntarily." "I figured. Look, Murphy, no one doubts your commitment, but you've been operating at 100% for too long. You need rest. Take a couple of days off the clock." Sienna frowned. "Off, what would I even do?" Hendricks smiled faintly. "That's the point, figure it out." She didn't argue, but she didn't rest either. The next morning she found herself walking the perimeter wall just after sunrise. The sky was wide and gold, the air sharp with the smell of dust and diesel. She liked watching the base wake up, the small signs of life returning after another night of uncertainty. A few soldiers saluted as she passed, others just nodded respectfully. She still wasn't used to it. Respect was heavier than bullets sometimes. At the far edge of the compound, she stopped beside the west gate, the same direction the attackers had come from weeks before. The dirt beyond stretched for miles. She stared at it, imagining the shapes that might be out there, watching, waiting. The war didn't stop just because the shooting did. It always waited for the next weak moment. She stayed there until the sun was high, lost in thought. Later, back in the DFAC, she began organizing storage shelves for the new supplies. Her assistants watched her work silently. They'd learned that her way of keeping order wasn't about neatness, it was about readiness. Everything in its place. She labeled crates, adjusted racks, checked expiration dates. Small details, invisible to most, but to her, they meant survival. When the resupply convoy arrived that afternoon, one of the drivers, a young corporal named Vega, lingered by the counter after dropping off his manifest. "You're Murphy, right? The one from the story." Sienna didn't look up. "Depends which story." "The one where you saved half the base while cooking pancakes." "Ah, that one." He smiled awkwardly. "I just wanted to say my brother was stationed here last rotation. He told me about you before he went home, said if the base ever went to hell to find the woman in the kitchen. So, thanks, for keeping people alive." She paused, meeting his eyes. There was sincerity there, raw, unpolished. It hit harder than she expected. "Tell your brother I said he's welcome." "I will," he said, grinning before heading back out. She stood still for a moment after he left, feeling something she hadn't in a while. Not pride, not guilt, just connection. That night she finally took the colonel's advice. She walked out past the DFAC, down toward the vehicle depot, and sat on a low concrete barrier facing the desert. The sun was gone, but the horizon still glowed faintly orange. The air was cool, dry, and quiet. She pulled out a small metal box from her pocket, something she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a folded photograph, her SEAL team taken after a mission long before her injury. 6 faces smiling under the same harsh Afghan sun. 2 of those faces were gone now. One was still on active duty. The others scattered, retired ghosts. Her fingers brushed the corner of the photo, worn and creased. "We made it," she whispered. "Some of us anyway." A single tear slipped down her cheek, silent and unforced. She stayed there until the stars filled the sky, their cold light washing over the base. Somewhere she heard music faint from a distant radio, a country song, soft and cracked, drifting through the wind. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, not healed but grounded. The next morning, she arrived at the kitchen before anyone else. The radio played quietly as she worked the same song from the night before. She smiled to herself, flipping the first pancake, humming under her breath. Her assistant entered bleary-eyed. "You're early again, Sergeant." "Old habits," she said. He hesitated, then added softly, "You ever gonna take a real break?" She glanced at the sunrise outside the window. Maybe someday, but not today. Because she knew the truth now. Peace wasn't a destination. It was something you practiced, one meal, one breath, one sunrise at a time. She served breakfast that morning like she always did, steady, quiet, precise. The soldiers filed through, laughing again, lighter than before. The base was alive, and for now, that was enough. As she handed a tray to a young medic heading out on patrol, she said the same thing she said every day, though only a few ever caught the weight behind her words. "Stay safe out there." Then she turned back to the grill, the sound of sizzling batter blending with the hum of generators and distant radio chatter. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, the war outside felt far away. She didn't know how long the calm would last, maybe a day, maybe a week, but she'd learned not to ask for guarantees, only for purpose. And as long as she had that, she could keep going. Because strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered through the clatter of pans and the rhythm of a steady hand. Sometimes it wore an apron. And sometimes it smiled while carrying ghosts. Why did her past always find its way back, no matter how far she ran? 3 weeks had passed since the mortar attack, and the base had settled into its strange version of peace, the kind that always felt temporary. Soldiers laughed again, training drills resumed, and the hum of helicopters overhead became background music to daily life. But inside Sienna, something wasn't quiet. Sleep had become a suggestion, not a state. Every night she closed her eyes and saw flashes of movement, the muzzle fire, the look in an enemy's eyes just before he fell, the silence that followed. She told herself it was normal. Soldiers dreamed in echoes, but this felt different. Because lately, she'd started dreaming about her old team. Not the missions, the people. She saw them around a fire on some forgotten ridge, helmets off, faces lit by the glow. Her team leader Tors laughing softly, Daniels cleaning his rifle, Ward giving quiet orders with that calm tone she used to trust. Then she'd wake up before dawn, heart pounding, as if she'd heard their voices again. Memory or guilt, she couldn't tell the difference anymore. That morning the air was thick with heat and dust. A supply truck arrived early, kicking up clouds that drifted through the open doors of the dining facility. She was restocking crates when Colonel Hendricks appeared, her expression tight. "Sergeant Murphy," she said, stepping inside. "Got a minute?" "Of course, ma'am." Hendricks handed her a folder. The seal on it was different this time, Naval Special Warfare Command. "Orders?" Sienna asked, frowning. "Request," Hendricks corrected. "From your old unit. They're running a classified op nearby, needs short-term support." Sienna blinked. "Support from me?" "They specifically asked for you." "Who signed the request?" "Commander Elias Ward." The name hit harder this time. "When?" "They'll brief tonight at 2100 hours. You're not obligated, Sergeant, technically. You're reassigned to support command now. But Ward said it's advisory. 2 days tops." Sienna stared at the folder in her hands. "What kind of operation?" "Need to know, and apparently you'll know soon." When Hendricks left, the kitchen felt smaller. She opened the folder, scanning the sparse details. Recon and recovery, remote valley, insurgent compound, minimal footprint. It wasn't just a mission. It was the kind she'd spent years running before the injury. She traced a finger over the map printed inside. The coordinates were familiar, too familiar. She'd been there before, years ago, on a mission that hadn't gone as planned. The same mission that ended with her knee shattered and her team decimated. So that's what this was. The same ground, the same ghosts. That evening she stood in the briefing tent, the desert wind rattling the canvas. Ward was there, in full tactical gear, surrounded by a smaller group of operators, some she didn't recognize, others who nodded respectfully when they saw her. He gave her that same calm smile. Didn't think you'd come. Didn't think I had a choice. He gestured to the map. We picked up chatter from SIGINT local cell operating out of the same ridge complex as before. We think they've rebuilt the old compound. We're going in tomorrow night for confirmation and, if necessary, destruction. She stared at the map. The coordinates glowed red. That place again. Yeah. Why me? Because you know it better than anyone. You led the secondary approach route last time. You remember the tunnels, the rock formations. You're our memory. She exhaled slowly. You know what happened there, Ward. I do, his tone softened. And I also know it's time to close that chapter. Close it, easy to say. For hours after the briefing, she sat alone outside the DFAC, the map spread across her lap, the desert wind tugging at the corners. She remembered every contour of that terrain, the narrow passes, the jagged ridges, the way the air smelled before dawn. She remembered Tors bleeding out beside her, whispering, "Don't stop moving." And she hadn't, until now. Williams found her there, crouched in the sand, lost in thought. "You look like you're back on the mountain," he said quietly. "Feels like I never left." He crouched beside her. "You going out again?" She hesitated. "It's just recon 2 days." He frowned. "You sure that's a good idea?" "No," she admitted, "but it's the right one." He nodded, understanding without needing more. "You'll come back." "I always do." But that night, as she packed her old gear, she wasn't sure if she believed it. Her knee brace, worn but reliable. Her sidearm, still oiled and ready. The silver star she left behind, hanging in the kitchen by the rifle, a promise maybe, or a reminder. The helicopter left before dawn. The desert below was endless, brown and scarred, like an old wound that refused to close. The team was small. Ward, 2 younger SEALs, and Sienna as advisor. No insignia, no chatter, just the rhythmic thump of the blades and the occasional flicker of lightning far on the horizon. When they landed, the silence hit first. The world felt muted, the kind of silence that swallows sound and memory alike. They moved on foot, low and fast, the air cold against their skin. The terrain hadn't changed much. Neither had the smell, dust, oil, and old fear. At the ridge, Ward raised a fist, signaling a halt. "Compound still active," he whispered. "Thermal shows heat signatures 6, maybe 7. We're observing, not engaging." Sienna crouched beside him, peering through binoculars. Through the scope, she saw movement, shadows in a doorway, weapons glinting in faint moonlight. She recognized the pattern of their patrols, their sloppy discipline. It wasn't a well-trained force, just desperate men trying to look organized. She felt the old instincts return, uninvited. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes tracked every angle, every possible escape route. The operator inside her, the one she thought she'd buried, woke up fully. Then she saw something that froze her. A mark on one of the men's vests, faded, barely visible but familiar. The same insignia from that old mission. The same faction that had killed her teammates years ago. Her heart slammed once hard. She whispered, "Ward, it's them." He looked through his scope, frowned. "You sure?" "Positive." He exhaled. "We were just supposed to confirm and report. Command will decide next steps." She lowered the binoculars slowly. "You're not seriously going to walk away, are you?" "Those are the orders." Her jaw tightened. "They killed our people. And we'll make sure they don't kill more. But not tonight. Not with 4 operators and an ex-cook." She glared at him. "Don't do that. Don't pretend I forgot how to fight." He sighed, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I'm not questioning your skill, Murphy. I'm questioning whether we do this smart or emotional." She looked away. The desert wind tugged at her sleeve. Sometimes emotional is smart. Ward didn't reply. He just gave the hand's signal fall back. They retreated into the shadows, silent as ghosts. But Sienna's pulse wouldn't settle. The faces she'd seen through the scope burned into her mind, reminders of unfinished stories. When they reached the extraction point, the team waited for pickup, whispering quietly. Sienna stood apart, staring back toward the ridge. Ward approached her. "You're somewhere else," he said. "Yeah, back there." He nodded. "I know that look. I've worn it too. You ever get tired of carrying ghosts?" He smiled faintly. "You stop carrying them, you stop caring." The helicopter came 15 minutes later. On the flight back, no one spoke, but Sienna made a decision she didn't share. That night back at Fob Sentinel, she sat alone in the DFAC, staring at the rifle on the wall. Her knees still ached from the climb, her body exhausted, but her mind was sharper than it had been in months. She knew what she was going to do. Ward might follow orders, but she'd made her peace with defying them long ago. She pulled the map from her pocket, flattening it on the counter. The ridge, the compound, the faces. Then she reached for the radio. "Williams," she said quietly. "Yeah. I need a truck, and I need you to forget you heard from me for the next 12 hours. He hesitated. "You're not serious." "I am. It ends tonight." A long pause. "Then you'll get your truck." "Thank you." She looked up at the silver star glinting faintly above her. The medal for valor, for restraint, for the right kind of violence. But this wasn't about medals. This was about ghosts. She slung her rifle over her shoulder, stepped into the cool night air, and disappeared into the darkness beyond the wire. The desert swallowed her whole. And somewhere out there, under the same stars that had watched her all these years, Sienna Murphy, the woman who'd cooked, fought, and endured, was heading back to where it all began. Because some battles don't end when the shooting stops. Some just wait for you to come back. How far do you go before you stop being a soldier and become something else entirely? The desert didn't answer her. It just swallowed sound, light, and hesitation. Sienna drove with the headlights off, the stars above her the only guide. The Humvee rumbled across uneven ground, its engine a low growl under the endless Afghan night. Every mile took her farther from the base, from safety, from orders, from the version of herself that followed rules. She didn't bring much. Her M4, her sidearm, 2 spare mags, a med kit, and a small satchel of water and rations. Enough to survive, not enough to stay comfortable. She hadn't told Hendricks. She hadn't told Ward. Williams had helped her load the gear without a word. He just looked at her once, eyes filled with the kind of understanding you didn't need to explain. "You'll come back," he'd said again. She nodded, though they both knew that was a promise she couldn't guarantee. The night stretched endlessly. Sand whispered beneath the tires. Every shadow looked alive. Every gust of wind carried memories. She thought about Torres again, the way he'd smiled at her after their first mission together, the way his voice had cracked over the comms during his last. She promised herself that one day she'd finish what they started. And tonight she intended to keep that promise. By 300 she reached the edge of the valley. The same ridgeline, the same rocks that had torn through her knee years ago. She shut off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, the memories pressing close. She could almost hear her old team's voices in the static of the wind. Then she moved, slow, careful, deliberate. Every step calculated, every sound measured. Her body remembered even if her knee protested. She crawled up the slope, belly to the ground, rifle cradled close. When she reached the ridge, she peered down. The compound was still there, crude, rebuilt from the bones of the one they destroyed years before. Corrugated roofs, mud walls, a single flickering light from a generator, and movement. 6 men, maybe 7, armed but lax, smoking near the entrance, talking quietly. Her scope caught the insignia again, the faded patch of the faction that had taken her team. Time hadn't erased it. Her breathing slowed. She could wait for backup, call Ward, follow protocol. But protocol hadn't buried Tors. Protocol hadn't saved the others. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Then she stopped. A movement caught her eye, a smaller figure stepping out from one of the inner rooms. Not a fighter. Younger. No weapon. Maybe 16, 17. A boy. He was carrying a metal pot, setting it near a fire. A cook. For a moment her chest tightened. That was what she looked like now, someone who wasn't supposed to be a threat. Someone the world overlooked until it was too late. The sight disarmed her more than any weapon could. She adjusted her scope again, her finger frozen above the trigger. Then she saw something else behind the boy, deeper in the compound. A cache of crates, explosives, ammunition, enough to fuel another series of attacks. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was prevention. Still, she hesitated. The easy part was pulling the trigger. The hard part was living with what followed. She remembered something Ward had told her once. Discipline isn't about not feeling, it's about feeling everything and still choosing the right thing. She whispered to herself, then let's do this right. She slid back from the ridge, keeping low, circling wide. It took her nearly an hour to reach the rear slope, the blind side of the compound. She moved like she used to, a ghost in the dirt. At the edge of the outer wall, she stopped to listen. Voices, laughter, no alarms, good. She planted 2 small charges from the emergency pack she'd brought, breaching grade, nothing fancy. Just enough to send a message. Then she crept toward the armory structure, slipping through a gap in the wall. The air inside was thick with dust and oil. Crates lined the walls, most marked with foreign script. She recognized some mortar rounds, small arms, old Soviet stock. She set the timer, 5 minutes. Then she froze again. The boy was there, he'd seen her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He looked terrified, wide-eyed, holding nothing but a dented metal cup. She raised a finger to her lips. Go. He hesitated. She pointed toward the hills, whispering, go now. He ran. She waited until his footsteps disappeared into the dark. Then she slipped back the way she came. At 4 minutes, she was halfway up the slope. The wind carried faint shouts from below. Someone had found the door ajar. She broke into a slow run, every muscle screaming, knee threatening to give. At 3 minutes, gunfire erupted, wild, panicked. At 2, she reached the ridge, dropped behind a rock, turned. At 1, the desert lit up. The explosion ripped through the compound, a deep, rolling thunder that echoed across the valley. A pillar of fire rose into the night, painting the rocks orange. Shouts turned to silence. Sienna pressed her forehead to the sand, breathing hard, the heat washing over her. She didn't cheer, she didn't even look. She just whispered, it's done. When the sound faded, she sat there for a long time, the stars bright and sharp above her. The boy was gone, vanished into the dunes. She hoped he kept running. By dawn, she was back in the Humvee, driving east. Her hands shook on the wheel, not from fear, from release. The radio crackled once, bass calm, searching for her. She ignored it. She'd call in when she was ready. She reached the outskirts of Fob Sentinel just as the sun rose, washing the world in pale gold. She parked the truck, stepped out, and felt the familiar ache in her knee flare with each step toward the gate. The guards stared, wide-eyed. One ran to alert command. Minutes later, Hendricks appeared, flanked by Ward and Williams. Murphy, the colonel said sharply, where the hell have you been? Sienna stopped a few feet away, dust coating her uniform, finishing something. Ward's eyes narrowed. You went back, didn't you? She didn't answer. You disobeyed direct orders, Hendricks said, voice tight. Yes, ma'am. And you blew up a target without authorization. Yes, ma'am. There was silence. The wind carried the faint smell of fuel and morning bread from the DFAC behind them. Ward stepped forward. "How many?" "7," she said quietly, "and one I let live." He exhaled slowly, studying her face. "The boy." She nodded. He looked away, something unreadable in his expression, half reprimand, half admiration. Hendricks finally spoke. "You realize what this means. Paperwork, investigation. You'll probably lose your commendation." "I didn't do it for a medal," Sienna said softly. The colonel stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You did what we all wanted to do years ago. Sometimes I hate the rules." Ward gave a faint, tired smile. "Sometimes rules need people like you to remind them why they exist." Sienna met his eyes. "And sometimes they need someone willing to break them." The colonel turned away. "Get cleaned up, Sergeant. We'll talk later." She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As they walked off, Ward lingered. "You saved lives tonight, Murphy. You also made enemies. You ready for that?" She looked toward the rising sun. "I've had worse." He smiled faintly. "You always were a stubborn one. Consistency is a strength." When he left, she walked slowly back toward the DFAC. The familiar smell of coffee met her at the door. Inside, everything was just as she'd left it, the pans stacked, the stove cold, the morning light spilling across clean counters. She set her rifle back on the hook and sat down at the prep table, head in her hands. For the first time in a long time, she felt both empty and at peace. She'd broken orders, defied command, and carried her ghosts back into the fire. But maybe, finally, she'd buried them. Outside, soldiers began lining up for breakfast, unaware that while they slept, one woman had changed the balance of a war, not with speeches or medals, but with the quiet conviction that some debts had to be paid in silence. She stood, straightened her apron, and turned on the stove. As the first pan hissed to life, she whispered to herself, "Back to work." Because redemption wasn't a ceremony. It was repetition, the quiet act of doing the right thing, even when no one saw. Sometimes, dignity didn't come from following orders. It came from following what was left of your heart. Why did peace always feel like a borrowed thing? Fragile, temporary, one breath away from breaking. The days after the Ridge mission passed like a slow burn. The base returned to its rhythm, but something had changed beneath the surface. People moved differently, quieter. Maybe they didn't know exactly what she had done, but soldiers always sensed when one of their own had crossed a line or erased one. Sienna felt it too. She hadn't been arrested, not formally. There'd been an inquiry, of course, paperwork, interviews, endless forms to fill. Hendricks sat across from her in a small room, recorder blinking red. Ward stood near the door, silent. "Let's start from the beginning," the colonel said evenly. Sienna stared at her hands, still rough from years of service. "I went to the compound, alone." "Why?" "Because I knew who they were. Because waiting for authorization would have meant another convoy ambushed, another flag folded. Because I've spent too long letting ghosts make the rules." Hendricks didn't interrupt, she just watched. "I didn't go there to kill them," Sienna continued quietly. "I went there to end something, for me, for my team." The colonel's tone softened. "You let one go." "A boy, too young to know what he was part of. If I shot him, I'd become what I spent years trying not to be." A long silence filled the room. The hum of the base generator vibrated faintly through the floor. Finally, Hendricks leaned back. "You understand I can't ignore this, Sergeant. Unauthorized engagement, destruction of foreign property, violation of mission protocol." "I understand." But Hendricks glanced briefly at Ward. "Given the circumstances, and your history, command is inclined to consider it a discretionary act under duress." Sienna frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they're not going to court-martial you." Sienna blinked. "That's generous." "Don't thank me," Hendricks said. Thank the 7 men who will never plant another IED because of you. Ward finally spoke. Also, intelligence confirmed your strike neutralized a key logistics hub. You did more in one night than most operations in months. Sienna exhaled slowly. So what now? Hendricks closed the folder. Now you rest, you stay on base, you stay in that kitchen. You let the war move without you for once. Sienna didn't argue, she just nodded. When the hearing ended, she stepped outside. The sunlight hit her face, bright, harsh, honest. She squinted up at it, feeling the heat against her skin. The world hadn't changed much. The same wind, the same sky, the same dust settling on her boots. But inside, something had finally shifted. That night she walked the perimeter again. Williams joined her halfway around like always. He didn't ask questions, just walked beside her, hands in his pockets. After a long silence, he said, "I heard about the inquiry." "Of course you did. You get to keep your rank. For now." He smirked faintly. "That's something." They stopped at the west fence, staring out into the dark. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the same horizon that had taken so many before. "You ever think about leaving?" Williams asked quietly. "Every day." "So why don't you?" She thought about that for a moment. Because leaving doesn't stop the memories, it just changes the view. He nodded slowly. "You're not wrong." The silence between them felt almost comfortable. Two soldiers too tired to pretend the world made sense anymore. After a while, she said softly, "When we first met, you thought I was just a cook." "I did." "You still think that?" He smiled faintly. "No, I think you're the reason half this base sleeps easier at night. You just happen to serve eggs while doing it." Sienna chuckled, a rare sound. "That's a hell of a compliment." "It's the truth." They stood there until the horizon began to lighten, the first hints of dawn spilling over the hills. When she returned to the DFAC that morning, the kitchen was already warm with the smell of fresh bread. One of the new recruits, Corporal Vega, was kneading dough with messy enthusiasm. He looked up as she entered. "Morning, Sergeant." "Morning," she replied. "You see the sunrise?" "I did." "Beautiful, huh?" She nodded. "Yeah, it is." He hesitated, then said, "Ma'am, I heard rumors about what you did out there. Is it true?" She stopped by the counter, met his eyes. "What do you think?" "I think sometimes stories say more about who we want to be than what really happened." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe this one should stay that way." He nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am." As the day went on, soldiers filtered in for breakfast. Laughter returned, the sound of boots on concrete, the scrape of trays. Life went on. She moved through it all like she always did, quiet, steady, unseen. And yet, everywhere she looked, she saw small things she hadn't noticed before. The medic sharing extra rations with a tired private. A mechanic joking with a translator. The tiny moments of humanity that existed between the noise. War had a way of stripping people down, but it also revealed what was left when everything else was gone. That afternoon, she sat outside on the loading ramp, a mug of coffee in hand, staring out at the hills. The heat shimmered above the sand. The wind smelled faintly of gun oil and bread. Ward approached quietly. He stood beside her for a moment before speaking. "You ever think about going back? To the teams, I mean." She shook her head. "No, that chapter's closed." "You were good, you know, one of the best." "I was trained to be," she said softly. "But being the best doesn't mean being whole." Ward studied her for a long moment. "You know, Torres used to say something about you." "Oh, yeah." "Yeah," he said. "Murphy's the kind of soldier who fights the war even when the shooting stops." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Ward nodded. "He'd be proud of what you did." She looked at him, eyes softening. "You think so?" "I know so." He started to leave, but she stopped him. "Ward." He turned. "Thank you for not stopping me that night." He gave a tired smile. Wouldn't have worked anyway. When he was gone, she sat in silence again, the cup cooling in her hand. Later that evening, as the sky turned orange, she took a walk to the memorial wall near the motor pool. The names carved there glinted in the fading light. She traced her fingers over a few: Tors, Daniels, Ray's, her old team. "I went back," she whispered. "It's done now." A small breeze stirred the dust, carrying her words away. Behind her, someone approached, the same young boy from the convoy. Vega again. He held a folded flag in his hands, the one from the last ceremony. "They said to put this with the others," he said. She nodded. "I'll take it." When he left, she knelt and placed the flag beneath the wall, smoothing it gently. For a moment, she just stayed there, head bowed. She wasn't praying, just remembering. When she stood, the stars were already visible, distant, steady, watching. The next day, Hendricks called her in. "Command reviewed your record," she said, handing over a sealed envelope. Sienna opened it. Inside was a transfer authorization, stateside duty, optional reassignment. "You can go home, Murphy," Hendricks said quietly, "if you want to." Sienna looked down at the paper. Home. The word felt foreign. She hadn't used it in years. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, "but not yet." Hendricks studied her for a moment. "You really like that kitchen, huh?" Sienna smiled faintly. "It's peaceful." The colonel nodded. "Then I guess you've earned it." When she left the office, the sun was high again, the sky a brutal blue. She walked slowly toward the DFAC, where the sound of clattering pans and laughter spilled into the open air. She stepped inside. Vega was arguing playfully with one of the new assistants over pancake mix proportions. Williams was sitting near the back, reading a worn-out book. It felt like a family, loud, messy, alive. She took her usual place at the stove, flipped the first pancake, and smiled. Outside, helicopters roared overhead, heading toward another horizon. Another mission, another story, but this one, this kitchen, these faces, this was hers now. And as the morning light poured through the windows, catching the steam rising from the pans, she felt something she hadn't in years. Stillness. The kind that didn't demand silence, only presence. She thought about everything she'd seen, everything she'd lost, everything she'd learned. About the difference between courage and peace, between fighting and surviving. War had taken her identity once, but in its strange, merciless way, it had also given her clarity. She wasn't a legend, she wasn't a ghost. She was just a soldier who stayed. A woman who found purpose in the ordinary. Someone who'd learned that redemption wasn't a medal or an ending, it was a habit. A choice you made every single day, when no one was watching. Outside, the flag above the base fluttered against the wind. The desert stretched endlessly beyond it, indifferent, eternal. Sienna watched it for a moment, then turned back to the stove. The sound of sizzling batter filled the air, warm, rhythmic, alive. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that quiet, unremarkable kitchen, surrounded by the hum of another fragile morning, Sienna Murphy, former Navy SEAL, base cook, survivor, finally understood that peace wasn't something you found out there. It was something you built. One act, one meal, one day at a time.